Welcome to this week's edition of World Crisis Radio. It is our special post-Thanksgiving edition. For those who are interested in the chronology, this is being taped on Tuesday evening, the 26th of November at about 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time now. So we're taping in advance. We can't cover the news stories in quite the way that we usually would, but let's try to make some points of lasting interest. First of all, Thanksgiving. We salute Thanksgiving. Happy Thanksgiving to everybody. Happy Thanksgiving around the world. We're unapologetically in favor of Thanksgiving, in spite of Noam Chomsky, Howard Zinn, Alexander Cockburn, and other detractors. It is better to have this civilization here than not to have it, with all of its failures and the other forms of civilization that were available. Probably not as productive for the world. And there is something positive to be said. So, Thanksgiving for that. Now, in particular, I want to give thanks to my listeners and my supporters, because if you take a look at the C-SPAN website, and in particular, if you take a look at the C-SPAN video library, you will see that in the last 30 days, I am generally the 11th or 12th most watched of all the C-SPAN programs on the website. So that doesn't count, obviously, people that watched it when it was broadcast, right? It was broadcast 3 times on a weekend a couple of weekends ago now. But I'm there right now. I'm number 11. I am neck and neck with Obama. There's Obama on the Affordable Care Act of November 14th is coming in with 5,272 views. And Tarpley, in this event, the event took place on September 24th, but unlike Obama, I didn't get on here the same day. I had to wait about a month. So call it, October 25th or whatever it was. But I come in with 4,869 views. Now, as the days go by, it varies. And I was, I'm closing in on Obama, right? He's got 5,272. I've got 4,869. Please, during the course of your Thanksgiving holiday, go and click on this, watch a little of it, and help me overtake Obama. Right behind me, dangerously close, is Bradley Manning verdict and treatment of whistleblowers. And here we have some hanger-on of the whistleblower cabal. He's only one view behind me. Good God. I hope people will rush to their computers right now and prevent me from being overtaken by Bradley Manning and the whistleblowers. I'm also within striking distance of Adam Green and the progressive interest groups. That is to say, what is that thing called? The Progressive Campaign, whatever it is, right? They're well-meaning, but the usual stuff, right? They believe in being in good with the Democratic Party, what we don't do. And I could also overtake the digital currencies flim-flam, right? Don't take any wooden bitcoins, right? Don't take any funny money. So all of those are within striking distance. Actually, Ted Cruz at the Iowa Ronald Reagan dinner is within reasonable striking distance if people really get excited. Now, what would my program have to do with Thanksgiving? Easy. The origin of Thanksgiving goes back to this. As I tried to point out, given the strictures of time, if you look at the Thanksgiving proclamation, the moment where this harvest festival, this vague Thanksgiving holiday becomes this great moment of national unity and national celebration, that is Abraham Lincoln doing that. And that is a proclamation written by Secretary of State Seward and issued, I believe, on October 3rd, 1863. And as I tried to point out in the course of that lecture, Gettysburg is the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd of July, Union victory. Union victory at Vicksburg, the surrender of Pemberton to Grant on July 4th. But after that, the news is all bad. The New York City draft riots in the middle of July 1863, the Union defeat at Chickamauga on the 20th. But then the arrival of the Russian Atlantic-Baltic Fleet in New York City on September 24th, bringing also the news that the Russian Pacific Fleet had similarly been ordered to proceed to San Francisco. My thesis is that the creation of the American Thanksgiving holiday owes a great deal to the support by Tsar Alexander II of the Russian Empire to Abraham Lincoln, and above all, saving the Union by preventing the British imperialists under Lord Palmerston, Lord Russell, Henry Gladstone, and the rest of these characters, and the French imperialists under Napoleon III, Napoleon le Petit. Those two imperialists in their combine were eager. They were actively seeking a pretext to attack the Union and to attack Lincoln. And it was the overwhelming power of Russia, the Russian fleet, already a serious force as commerce raiding, not exactly suitable for fleet actions, ship-of-the-line battle against the British, but as commerce raiders on the model of the Alabama, extremely dangerous to the British, would have swept the Union Jack off the seas. It would have put the lie forever to the idea that Britannia rules the waves, because they would have been joined by the Yankee privateers as well. So it was, on the whole, the Russian fleets that made Thanksgiving possible, I would say. Read the proclamation. You'll see that it says we have to give thanks because even though we've been in this terrible civil war for some years now, which would seem to constitute practically an invitation for hostile foreign powers to intervene, so far nobody has intervened. And when Seward wrote that in the light of the Russian fleets in New York and San Francisco, I think he was becoming more confident that there would be no British or French attack against the Union. And this had also been borne out by the fact that precisely during these days and weeks, the two layered ironclad battleships, the Anglo-rebel rams that were being built by the lairds of Birkenhead in England, these were being withheld from the Confederates. So this is in many ways the last gasp of the Confederacy on the world stage, at least, apart from certain other complications. But by and large, it's the curtain coming down, except barring unforeseen and extraordinary events. So it's in that spirit that the Thanksgiving Proclamation was issued, October 3rd. Go and read the proclamation. It's thank you. It's in a general way, thank you for we can win the Battle of Gettysburg and Vicksburg, and that we have not been attacked by foreign countries even in this moment of weakness. Well, the merit there is due in very large part to Russia. So you can say that the most American of all holidays is at the same time the beneficiary of a big Russian contribution. And when you see these demagogues, this degenerate elite that we have today, still stuck in their blind, idiotic, bankrupt, arid Cold War mentality, their hatred of Putin. They hate Putin for many reasons, right? They hate anybody who believes in the uses of power. They hate anybody who's not axiomatically impotent from the word go, right? This applies to the leftists as well as the neocons, of course, hate him. They consider him a dangerous rival. And I guess given their outlook, that is true. So please go to the C-SPAN video library. It's C-SPAN video library. You go just put in Tarpley, or you go to the set. You make sure that you're doing most watched from the last 30 days. Go to the second page, and you'll see me there in number 11 position. Let's try to get me on the first page. Back in a minute on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. This is our Thanksgiving weekend, post-Thanksgiving edition. Please take a look at tarpley.net. You've got an interesting debate that I was in on Press TV of Iran with a representative of the Hudson Institute concerning the U.S. Iran, the multilateral multi-power accord from Geneva this past weekend. And of course, take a look at those books of mine up there. We'll be adding to that list before too long, and we'll save that announcement for suitable fanfare in the coming week or two. But in any case, take a look at Surviving the Cataclysm. If you haven't read that, you're incapable of really getting what's happening in the economic world, I'm afraid. And similarly, to know what you missed, to really give thanks, read the one about Romney, and you can count your blessings. Take a look at the one about 9/11, and above all, the methodology, the patsies, the moles, and the technicians. And this, I think, will help you to evaluate the Kennedy literature if you've gotten interested in that. But as I say, please go to C-SPAN and click on Russia's participation in the U.S. Civil War. It was, for much of the past week, the number 4 public affairs event. I don't know exactly how they arrive at that classification. Maybe because it was at the press club rather than some university campus. But it was number 4. It was up there with Obama and Hillary, and I was competing. So help me to overtake Obama. Help me to get on the first page. The reason for this is we want to obviously impact current politics, and the anti-Putin campaign is relentless. It just never ends, and we want to counter that because this is bad for the U.S., bad for Russia, bad for the world, and the people who are doing it are bad. So let's undercut them. Please help me to get my lecture rebroadcast on C-SPAN. Please help me to get it rebroadcast on Thanksgiving weekend, around Christmas, New Year's, some holiday time when the viewing of C-SPAN is great, or indeed any time. Any weekend now in the holiday season would be great. So please help me to keep this thing in the public eye. It is already, I think, with about 5,600 views. It's more than certainly any recent thing on the Civil War, and maybe I don't know how far back that goes, but it's very much in the public eye. In other words, it has touched the chord. And again, forget about me. This is the reservoir of goodwill for Russia that exists in the American people. And this is where you see the dividing line between the people and that degenerate elite, that Wall Street degenerate, decadent gang that has usurped control over the country in the 50 years since the death of Kennedy. They have been challenged hardly at all. So now, my thanks to the people that have gotten me this far, and my thanks in advance for what I hope you're going to do when you get a chance. Right, switch away from that football game and take a look at the Russian fleets. Right, stick it to some relative who gives you a hard time. But now we got to look ahead to Thanksgiving. Obviously, we want to be armed with all the good arguments for the Thanksgiving table, and we're looking forward to the coming year as a great harvest time for the Tax Wall Street Party. Right, we've built on the Credico for Mayor campaign. We're headed now for candidacies in quite a number of states, for federal office, for state level office, even for local office in some cases. But we're going to be playing on all tables. We're going to be playing all the angles. Now, 2 things that have happened, I think, give us grounds also for a general optimism. Obviously, we always want to cultivate optimism, right? We are Leibnizians. We are the followers of Leibniz, and this, of course, means a metaphysical optimism about the human condition. The potential for good and for progress is always there, but you've got to use it. It's potentially good, not automatically, but potentially. It's certainly not completely evil. It's potentially good. So we want to move forward on these things, and specifically now there are real things of encouragement that are actually happening around us. I cite 2 things. The Iranian peace accord, the Iranian modus vivendi, the deal, as we call it in our vulgar language of today, the multilateral accord with Iran, That helps us turn away from the brink of World War III. Anybody who doesn't see that overriding fact had better have their head examined. I'm seeing libertarians blinded by hatred of Obama, absolutely blinded, in a way that Christ told you not to do. Don't be blinded by hate. It's very good advice. It's highly practical. But so many blinded by hatred of Obama that they want to find some reason to object to the war avoidance policy that somehow seems to be winning out. I'll tell you why it's winning out. It's winning out because the American people are sick of war. They are absolutely not interested in being dragged into a new conflict by the demagogue Netanyahu, by the secret operator Bandar, or by anybody else. That primary political datum, that overwhelming political reality, if you wage war, you will be politically destroyed on the home front, seems to have gotten through to Obama based on his Syrian experience. And seems to have even impinged on Kerry, the skull and bones man. So this is one side of it. The other one is the nuclear option. The nuclear option is a powerful step forward. I never thought I would see the Democratic Party capable of so much. Now, you might say, from the more radical point of view, you might say, well, gee, it's really not that much. It's too little, too late, almost. May not be too late, may not be too little, but it's certainly little and late. But compared to the Democratic Party track record, this is truly the millennium. This is really something out of the ordinary. And why it's positive, it is an indispensable step towards avoiding that permanent Republican austerity dictatorship, which I have warned about, which we would have had under Romney. Here's a reason to be thankful. Be thankful Romney didn't win the presidency. You'd be at war with Syria, you would be at war with Iran, and vis-a-vis Russia and China, God only knows. I don't want to find out. I didn't want to find out. Therefore, we had to stop Romney, the guy who said that Russia is the main geopolitical enemy of the United States. Absolute insanity. Disqualified from holding any federal office, just by that lunatic statement alone, to say nothing of the 47% or whatever else he had. We want to avoid the GOP permanent austerity dictatorship, and that means we cannot let the Republicans pack the federal judiciary with fascist judges. Now, let's just go back and take a little bit of a look. We'll get back to the details of these two important questions. But look, we've talked about the party system, and what we're seeing now is the death agony of the old party system and the birth pangs of the new. And we'll be back with more about that in just a minute on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Concerning Kennedy, we want to give thanks that Kennedy saved the world from thermonuclear destruction during the Cuban Missile Crisis. People who say that Kennedy was a mediocre president should bear in mind this is the most documented, certainly the most documented known case in which the specific policies of an American president turned the world away from the brink of thermonuclear Armageddon and absolute destruction. And I don't see any other parallel case. There may be some that we don't know of, but certainly in terms of what is generally known, this saved the world. Now, he did it in cooperation with Khrushchev. He sent that back-channel message through Bobby Kennedy to Dobrynin up there by Cleveland Park, and the message was, I'm afraid that I can't control the generals. I'm afraid they're going to try to overthrow me and then attack you. And that is what convinced Khrushchev that it was time to put an end to this crisis. So during the Cuban Missile Crisis, Kennedy, along with Khrushchev, I put them together, they saved the world. It's another good example of cooperation with Russia when you really need it. But let's just look back now to what's been going on. The party systems that we've talked about, right? The first party system, the Federalist one, the George Washington Hamilton one, from about 1788 to 1828. The founding of the country, the creation of the Hamiltonian National Bank, other positive measures, winning the War of 1812 in the sense of surviving it against the British, and so forth. This, on the whole, overwhelmingly positive, right? Surviving the British Death Watch. The second phase, a disaster. the traitor Andrew Jackson of the Aaron Burr faction takes over, destroys the Bank of the United States, shuts down economic development, puts the United States on a course to civil war, because in the lack of economic development, the slave cotton plantation interest reasserts itself. 1860 to 1896, positive, the Lincoln Republicans, and this is agricultural development, the Homestead Act, the Transcontinental Railway, the massive industrialization, one of the greatest expansions of industrialization, manufacturing, and therefore of prosperity, although imperfectly distributed, to be sure, and plenty of oppression for labor and others, but nevertheless, a huge step forward on the path of humanity. 1896 to 1932 is another Republican cycle, but this time it's finance capital. This time it's Rockefeller, it's Wall Street. Even the Democrat like Woodrow Wilson is an absolute disaster with the Federal Reserve System intervening in World War I, the FBI, and so forth. And then you get into the 20s, it's Republican puppets of Andrew Mellon running the show, leading then to the crash of 1929 and the Great Depression. The most successful party cycle we've had, 1932 to 1968, it is the New Deal cycle, inaugurated by Franklin D. Roosevelt, based on the development of the labor movement, the expansion of unions, the New Deal reforms, Glass-Steagall, and other positive measures, but the Social Security Act of 1935, the creation of a social safety net for the elderly, for the disabled, for mothers with dependent children. It is the first time in human history that the middle class becomes a numerical majority of the entire society. And that emerged in the 50s and 60s, when the mature New Deal, under the auspices of Eisenhower, to some extent, led to the greatest increases in the American standard of living that we've ever seen. And it's a time when the wars, primarily World War II, that are waged are carefully chosen and generally victorious. Although the control of the Harriman-Atchison gang over Truman leads us into the disaster of Korea, Eisenhower generally avoided any large-scale conflicts. But then we've had this disastrous nightmare of reaction, the Southern strategy of 1968 to 2008. It's based on racism. It's based on the backlash with the Southern states shifting out of the Democratic column into the Republican one, engineered by Nixon, by Kevin Phillips. Is there a difference? And others. The labor movement crushed and defeated, real wages everywhere in decline, narcotics, despair, disorientation, Malthusianism growing. The wars were either lost, if it's a serious opponent like Vietnam, the war is lost. Otherwise, it's small-scale colonial wars against fundamentally defenseless countries like Iraq. Now, this transition from the 1932 to 1968 New Deal cycle to the 68 to 2008 Southern strategy is marked by a series of events, as I talked about, right? The assassination of Mattei in 62, the constant attempts to kill de Gaulle. The Kennedy assassination is probably the capital event that marks the beginning of the end of the New Deal cycle. 1964, then the Gulf of Tonkin. Johnson lacks the maturity to say no to the generals, and pretty soon you're on the path to the escalation of the Vietnam War. The Democratic Party, under the burden of that, begins to break up. Eugene McCarthy runs for president. RFK runs, is assassinated. MLK already assassinated. Democratic Party is smashed. The machine that Roosevelt had assembled is smashed, and we get then the Humphrey against Nixon. Nixon wins, and this then leads to more economic disasters. Let me just point to the fact that the last time you had a really militant strike that I saw anything of was 1969, the General Electric strike. I was living in upstate New York. There was a strike support apparatus assembled for the General Electric strike. 1971 is a fateful date for everybody. It is the final breakup of the Bretton Woods economic system. That was the New Deal for the world economy from 1944 to 1971. That guaranteed the best rates of economic growth before or since it was dirigist, it was Hamiltonian, and Nixon and Kissinger and Arthur Burns destroyed it. After that, we have phase one, phase two, phase three, the breaking of the labor movement. But if you go back and you look at this really cataclysmic series of events in the 1960s, what you're seeing there is the death of the New Deal paradigm, the New Deal party system, and the coming of the reactionary Southern strategy, which puts the domination of the country into the most backward segments, right? Nut country, as Kennedy would have said. But now we're living in the breakup of the Southern strategy. And what you see, right, the conflicts that are going on indicate that lots of reactionary forces are not prepared to give up. They are doomed by ideology. They have gone so far out on the Austrian libertarian limb that any sane person, even a person motivated by greed, would say that they're absolutely insane. They're mad as hatters. They're ready for the Creedmoor or Bellevue or whatever it is, and they're doomed by demographics because as this paradigm, the demographic basis of the Southern strategy, right, the angry white man in the South and rural, has aged and died off, then you've got the influx of people from Latin America, from Mexico, from the Caribbean, from the Far East, from Asia, and from other places who simply cannot share these lunatic ideas that these people have. We've discussed the fighting inside of the Republican Party. Remember, we got the legions of greed. We've got the evangelicals or bigots. We've got the neocon warmongers. We've got the libertarians, who are the stoners, and the right-wing anarchists are also in there with the libertarians. The big fight is between the libertarian right-wing anarchists who want to destroy the government and the legions of greed who say, no, we want to use it to make money for ourselves. We want corporate welfare. The libertarians don't agree. There's also a fight between the neocons and the libertarians, at least there was until this Iran deal, that the neocons want war, the libertarians say they don't. But now we have to see. And the evangelicals don't really get along that well with the Wall Street people either, because the Wall Street people are polymorphous, perverse, and the evangelicals are extremely uptight about all this stuff. So, this is now the doomed Republican Party. What can take its place? We'll be back in a minute. Well, welcome back to World Crisis Radio. We could do a longer comparison of the libertarians to Diogenes and the Cynics, to Al-Ghazali in the Muslim world, to William of Ockham, the nominalist of late medieval Europe, the libertines of Venice and France of the 1600s, 1700s, or the anarchists of the 19th century. But those are the libertarians. They are a corrosive force, hostile to civilization in general. Now, concerning, we could probably just do the nuclear option first of all. We've talked about the permanent austerity dictatorship demanded by the Republicans. The goal is destroy all unions, with Ron Paul and Rand Paul out there leading the charge, right? The new nationwide union-busting law that they want. At the same time, they want to limit the right to vote. They want to exclude blacks, Hispanics, old, young, anybody who's not a country club wealthy Republican. In order to make this all stick, you've got to control the federal judiciary. You've got to have the federal judiciary larded with fascist judges. Now, this is why the Republicans have blocked all of Obama's appointees. Obama's appointees are as bad as you want to make them, but they're not part, a priori, of the permanent austerity dictatorship. They're probably against it, right? They may be feminists, they may be whatever they are. They're not going to be enthusiastic participants in the legions of greed and the permanent austerity dictatorship. The Republicans were as much at war as they could have been in the kind of minority they have in the Senate. If you had waited, suppose old Harry Reid had said, well, I'm going to back down again. That would mean that by the time you got to the next president, assuming that's going to be Christie, nightmare vision, but say it's going to be Christie, he would then have twice as many judges to appoint, and every one of them would be a fascist. You would get a complete fascist judiciary. So the overwhelming necessity now is to lard the federal judiciary with people who are not devotees of the fascist austerity dictatorship. They can be just about whatever else. Obviously, you want them to be as good as they can be, but since that's hardly likely with Obama, still, the main thing is that they not be a cog, an integral part of the permanent austerity dictatorship. So that's essential. And don't say, oh, Harry Reid attacked them, therefore they're going to turn around if they ever get the majority. They would have done that anyway, whenever they got to the majority. God help us. We must now decide that the Republican Party will never put another president into the White House and that they will never again dominate either house of Congress. Remember the perspective. Destroy the Republican Party in place, then split the Democrats, Wall Street Democrats with Obama, Schumer, and Durbin, and populist or pro-labor Democrats with Elizabeth Warren, Sherrod Brown, Marcy Kaptur, Fazio, and various others. The other thing that I think Reid may have in mind, knowing these lunatics, is to guard them, to make them go bonkers. Right? With Cruz, they went bonkers. Now they have really been dissed. They have really been humiliated. So it means, I would say, when we come back, I hope, on December 15th and then January 15th, when it's time for the new budget, I hope the Republicans will be as recalcitrant and as angry and as full of sabotage as they have always been. I want them to shut the government down again. Let them shut the government down for a month or two. Their name will be mud. They will hasten their own doom and absolute destruction. And the other positive benefit is that Obama's legislative agenda is dead. Good. We didn't want it. That was the chained CPI. Remember that when it comes to this economic stuff, Obama is still very much on the side of Wall Street, and we don't want those measures. Now, the other one is Iran. This is simply war avoidance. With Netanyahu, the lunatic Netanyahu believes that you can never trust Iran. No deal with Iran is possible. You've got to prevent them from getting a nuclear weapons capability. Capability just means that you have economic development, right? That you're not primitive, that you have a full-set economy. If you have a full-set economy, you have the ability to make a weapon, right? Like Germany, Japan, Italy, the Netherlands, Brazil, all of them could do this. Most of them have decided not to. But with Netanyahu, he says no deal is possible, and you're sliding towards the capability. Therefore, war is essential. War is unavoidable, says the demagogue Netanyahu. And at a certain point, somebody has got to close the door on that, put it into it, and say, no, no, no. The thing that I'm amazed, once again, the libertarians, blinded by hatred, whining, oh, Kerry lied. They even get to the point of saying, well, if Saudi Arabia and Israel now attack the Iranians, that's Obama's fault. No, that is not Obama's fault. That will be the fault of Prince Bandar and Netanyahu, whom he does not control. And this goes together with this strange attempt of the libertarians to take over Kennedy. Kennedy, remember, was the author of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. That includes the public accommodations that cannot be segregated. No matter who owns them, they're a common carrier. And that's the thing that little Ron Paul and little Rand Paul have built their careers on opposing. I'm sorry. The libertarians hate Kennedy. Kennedy challenged Ross Barnett, George Wallace on the education provisions, right? Obviously, no libertarian is interested in that. Kennedy got into a big fight with Roger Blau, who represented cartels in reality, but the libertarians would say he represented the free market. And once again, H.L. Hunt and his lifeline radio attacks on Kennedy, it seems to me, are the precursors of many of these figures that we hear today. So the basis, once again, that Obama has wisely recognized, the American people are sick of war. Any politician proposing more war will be swept away. However, in the elite, in the Washington Beltway, among these degenerates, there is this idea of, oh, Obama, he cut a sorry figure with Syria. We don't care about that. He avoided war. And now with this deal with Iran, well, I really don't know. We know it's a step away from war. It also points to the problem that so many of the pro-war left, somehow they can't seem to get over their hatred of Iran. and their predilection for the jihadi cannibals of Syria, right, with Al-Qaeda and Nusra and the rest of them. So the point is, the U.S. foreign policy has to be demilitarized. But then what is left? After Bush and Cheney, they've taken us so far down the road to degradation that if you're going to replace the old militarized foreign policy, you'd have to do that based on economic development. I mean, foreign aid up to a point. Emergency food aid, yes, indeed. Do that. But then you've got to have productive investment, and that's going to be done on a mutually advantageous business-style basis. We would need to fund the Export-Import Bank. We would need to seize another part of the Fed to open up a cash conduit from the Fed to the Export-Import Bank, among other things, to start high-technology, capital-intensive, energy-intensive exports of capital goods to the third world for infrastructure and for manufacturing. In other words, you want to get in there and wrestle with the Chinese, and you want to do it on a demilitarized basis, get set for heavy-duty investments, but which are profitable investments. Now, probably at the end of the show today, depending on how it goes, I also want to point to the question of Thanksgiving, the poor, the wretched of the earth, right? The people that we're told in that famous Dickens story, right? Your soul had better walk abroad among your fellow people. One story in the Washington Post, actually two. Rural Kentucky. People are getting health care. It's often Medicaid. Yeah, Medicaid. Good. They should be on Medicaid. They're breaking into tears because they've never had health insurance in their lives. And it's been decades since they got checked up. The other question is the low-wage workers. So from these situations, we're going to take increased devotion, redouble our efforts on the front of the Wall Street sales tax and seizing the Fed. And we'll be back in just a minute. Is flim-flam, right? Don't take any wooden bitcoins, right? Don't take any funny money. So all of those are within striking distance. Actually, Ted Cruz at the Iowa Ronald Reagan dinner is within reasonable striking distance if people really get excited. Now, what would my program have to do with Thanksgiving? Easy. The origin of Thanksgiving goes back to this. As I tried to point out, given the strictures of time, if you look at the Thanksgiving Proclamation, the moment where this harvest festival, this vague Thanksgiving holiday becomes this great moment of national unity and national celebration, that is Abraham Lincoln doing that. And that is a proclamation written by Secretary of State Seward and issued, I believe, on October 3rd, 1863. And as I tried to point out in the course of that lecture, Gettysburg is the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd of July, Union victory. Union victory at Vicksburg, the surrender of Pemberton to Grant on July 4th. But after that, the news is all bad. The New York City draft riots in the middle of July 1860 for that. Now, in particular, I want to give thanks to my listeners and my supporters because if you take a look at the C-SPAN website, and in particular, if you take a look at the C-SPAN video library, you will see that in the last 30 days, I am generally the 11th or 12th most watched of all the C-SPAN programs on the website. So that doesn't count, obviously, people that watched it when it was broadcast, right? It was broadcast 3 times on a weekend a couple of weekends ago now. But I'm there right now. I'm number 11. I am neck and neck with Obama. There's Obama on the Affordable Care Act of November 14th is coming in with 5,272 views. And Tarpley, in this event, the event took place on September 24th, but unlike Obama, I didn't get on here the same day. I had to wait about a month. So call it, October 25th or whatever it was. But I come in with 4,000. Welcome to this week's edition of World Crisis Radio. It is our special Thanksgiving edition. For those who are interested in the chronology, this is being taped on Tuesday evening, the 26th of November at about 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time now. So we're taping in advance. We can't cover the news stories in quite the way that we usually would, but let's try to make some points of lasting interest. First of all, Thanksgiving. We salute Thanksgiving. Happy Thanksgiving to everybody. Happy Thanksgiving around the world. We're unapologetically in favor of Thanksgiving, in spite of Noam Chomsky, Howard Zinn, Alexander Cockburn, and other detractors. It is better to have this civilization here than not to have it, with all of its failures and the other forms of civilization that were available. Probably not as productive for the world. And there is something positive to be said. So, Thanksgiving 3, the Union defeat at Chickamauga on the 20th. But then the arrival of the Russian Atlantic-Baltic Fleet in New York City on September 24th, bringing also the news that the Russian Pacific Fleet had similarly been ordered to proceed to San Francisco. My thesis is that the creation of the American Thanksgiving holiday owes a great deal to the support by Tsar Alexander II of the Russian Empire to Abraham Lincoln, and above all, saving the Union by preventing the British imperialists under Lord Palmerston, Lord Russell, Henry Gladstone, and the rest of these characters, and the French imperialists under Napoleon III, Napoleon le Petit. Those two imperialists in their combine were eager. They were actively seeking a pretext to attack the Union and to attack Lincoln, and it was the overwhelming power of Russia. The Russian fleet, already a serious force as commerce rating, not 869 views. Now, as the days go by, it varies. And I was, I'm closing in on Obama, right? He's got 5,272. I've got 4,869. Please, during the course of your Thanksgiving holiday, go and click on this, watch a little of it, and help me overtake Obama. Right behind me, dangerously close, is Bradley Manning verdict and treatment of whistleblowers. And here we have some hanger-on of the whistleblower cabal. He's only one view behind me. Good God. I hope people will rush to their computers right now and prevent me from being overtaken by Bradley Manning and the whistleblowers. I'm also within striking distance of Adam Green and the progressive interest groups. That is to say, what is that thing called? The Progressive Campaign, whatever it is, right? They're well-meaning, but the usual stuff, right? They believe in being in good with the Democratic Party, what we don't do. And I could also overtake the digital currency